Hi everybody, and welcome back to my tutorial series on C++ plugin development for Cinema 4D. So what we finished off with in the previous tutorial was creating our first object. And this is the object here, and it's just drawing a cube on screen. And if we take a look at the attribute editor down here, we can see that all we've got here is we've got basic, which is these settings, and we've got coordinates, which are these settings. And the next step in creating an object is that you might want to add your own object settings to this. In the case of the cube, a default cube, you can see it's got an object tab here, and it's got size X and segments and a few other options, and it's also got a Fong tab, which is actually just that tag there. But the one for this object is this object tab. So we want to add our own UI to our first object. And to do that, we're going to use resource files called resource description files. And these are files you're going to create on disk. And if you want to learn about these, let's just bring up the documentation. Just if you want to quickly have a look at what this is. So we come in here, and now you want to click on plugin development. And over here on the side, you want to go to plugin resources. Well, it's right here actually, plugin resources. And it's the res folder that you see in all your plugins. And they take, for dialogues, they take a description resource, and they also have a description manual to differentiate the two for node data. And node data is what our object is derived from. And so we're going to do it for the object data. We can take a look at the descriptions another time. Just click on the description manual. And this shows how you do it within code, but I'm going to show how to do it on disk itself. I'm just going to go back in here, and we'll come back and we'll look at some of this stuff just another time. But I just wanted to point out this is the kind of information we can come to if you want to actually read something. But now I'm just going to take you through doing this manually. So I'm going to close down this. And the easiest way to do this manually is just to copy what's in this sample SDK. So we come into our C/code, and I'm just going to close this down. We're just going to deal with files and create a new one of these. So we're going to go into our SDK plugins first plugin. Let's just make this a bit bigger. I think I can snap it to the side there. And so we got our two windows open here. And what I want to go to on this side is plugins Cinema 4D SDK. We're going to use this, we're going to copy stuff across to our first plugin. And let's just grab all of it actually. Let's just grab this res file. This is the folder that you want, res folder. Copy that, paste it in there. Now it's going to have quite a lot of information in there. And I'm just going to close that down now, and let's just go into this res folder. So the res folders contain thumbnail images that you can use for your object. So I might actually use one of these just to give us a little bit of something to look at as well. So I'll just hijack one of these as well. But to begin with, I'm just going to change this back to, I'll leave it in this view. So I'm going to keep one of these. So I might keep this this one here. So I'm going to select all of these thumbnails. Select all of these ones here, and except for that one, I'm going to delete that. And I'm going to delete not the header file, leave that there, but I'm going to delete all these other ones. And I'm going to delete that. I'm just going to rename this one to first object. And that's what we're going to use for our icon. You can change that later. So that's our icon for our resource, and we'll get to that later. Now you can delete the scenes folder, the scene folder here, because we're not going to use that. And you can also delete the dialogues folder because we're not going to use anything from there at this stage. And inside the strings, we'll get to that in a second. First I want to talk about this symbols.h file. So we're just going to edit that. So I'm going to actually bring back the Visual Studio. So I'm just going to resize that, bring up Visual Studio. I'm just going to load this into Visual Studio. And this is used throughout the plugins wherever you see text that says GE load string. So wherever you'll see this, and you'll see there's quite a few cases when I just search for it. And one example is right here. It's registering a mesh. This is another object, and it's going load string, and it's calling it with this ID. So this ID is within this file here. And we want to create an ID for our first object as well. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go into this C4D symbols.h, and again making sure that we're actually looking at the one that's in our folder, just in case we don't want to edit the actual one for the Cinema 4D SDK. I'm just going to select everything in here all the way to the top, almost to the top, delete it, but I'm going to leave the top one there at 10,000 because I want to start our one at 10,000 as well. I'm just going to rename that to first object. And now we want to have a piece of text that's going to go along with this, which is what's going to be displayed in the UI for our first object. So I'm going to now go into strings underscore en underscore us, and that's US English edition of the string files. You can have these in multiple languages as well, and that was in the documentation that I previously had open. So open this up, and there's the first file in here is C4D strings underscore str, and we're going to edit that. I'm actually going to just bring that into here as well, and now I'm going to basically do the same thing. I'm going to remove everything in there. You can see all the text here. If you were to look in the menu in the Cinema 4D SDK under the extensions, you would see all these text. That's the text that is appearing in the menus. I'm going to delete all those anyway, so it's going to be cut back to just this. And now I'm going to copy that IDS first object and paste that there. And we're going to call this, I'm going to call it my, oh, I need to go up here. So we're just going to call this my first object. And we're going to make this, or we're going to use this right now in our file. We're going to go to first object, and where we register it, I'm just going to change this here to GE load string my first object. And we just need to make sure at the top here that we include C4D underscore symbols. Actually, the file might not be recognized yet because we haven't run the project tool, but I'm just going to go to the res file here, make sure I just copy the right name, .h. And we just want to rebuild the project so that it picks up that res file. So I'm going to run the build SDK. And now it'll pick up that res folder, and it'll include the header file found in there. And we reload. Now you'll see there's a res folder there, and it contains the C4D header, and also contains at the moment all the header files from the description, which we don't actually need, but at least it's found this, and it's the file we were just working on. So if I go back to first object again, and now I just compile that. You should see that it compiles fine. It's found this ID, and it's using that as the string name. So let's go back into our folder again and look at that resource folder again. C4D plugins, first plugin, res. I'm actually going to make that a bit smaller again. And let's go into the description folder now. And we just want to copy one of these that's sort of related to what we're doing. And the standard in here is anything that starts with an O as an object. So let's just choose rounded tube. So I just want those ones. So I'm going to select all, and then just keep those unchecking them, and then delete everything except O rounded tube and O rounded tube.res. And I'm going to rename this to O first object, and I'm going to rename the res file as well. And I'm just going to open these up, and I'm actually going to use a text editor to open these, because if I was to just drag and drop this in here, Cinema 4D, sometimes, not Cinema 4D, I always say Cinema 4D, I mean Visual Studio, it also has a concept of .res files. And so I'm going to leave this in here and edit it in here, but if you do open a .res file in Visual Studio, and you notice it doing some strange things, then just open the .res file in your text editor of choice, a plain old text editor, like Notepad, or brackets, or anything you want, Sublime Text. But this seemed to have worked okay in 2017. So I'm just going to continue editing it within here directly. What I'm going to do is name this up here the same as the file itself, which was O first object, but I'm changing that first letter to a capital O. And I'm changing this name here to be the same. And then I'm just going to remove all these properties here. Actually, I'll leave one property in here. I'll delete everything, and I'm going to change this to first object. I'm going to call this size. So this is going to be the name of our first UI element that's going to appear within the UI, the objects tab of our first object. And what you're seeing here is a kind of hierarchical include as well. This is similar to C++ in a way, the way they've constructed these. So this resource file is including another resource file called obase, and that's got some default information in it. And then on top of that, we're creating our own group with our own properties, and by default there's an ID object properties, and that will have a tab called object. And it's also including this down the bottom, O primitive axis, and that will let it switch, put in the default like X, Y, and Z kind of orientation. And so we'll leave that in for now, but if we don't want that, we just remove that right there. And we will remove it in fact later, but I just want to show what it is. And now we want the header file for this. I want to rename that to O first object. And we only have one parameter of our own, and that is this first object size. So I'm going to copy that, paste it in here, and again it's going to start at 1,000, and then I'm going to delete the rest of these. So we're just going to have one UI element, and that's its ID. It's going to start at an ID of 1,000. And the last thing we want is the strings file. So let's go back to the res folder, go into strings, and I'm going to delete the dialogues one because we're not going to worry about that for now. And I'm going to go into description, and I'm going to find that one that we copied, O rounded tube. I'll select everything except that one, and then just press delete. And again, this needs to be renamed to be the same as we had before, so O first object. And then we'll drag this in, see if we can edit it in here, and we can, which is great. And oh, did I just close it? No, I didn't. So O, capital O, and this is relating directly to this res file. So this name here, so this one up here, this is basically referring the file name, needs to be the same, although we're using a capital O, but that's okay. And we've got the name, and that's actually referred, also we need to copy that container, that needs to be this one up here, again related to the file name. Next we have its name, and this is this next one here, and I call it my first object. Now you might be wondering why it's called this here, and we put it in that string file as well before, which I think I just closed. I won't worry about that for now. Anyway, just follow along, and I may explain that later. And the only thing else in here that we need to set is this first object size. So we're going to have a string for that, and we're just going to call this custom size, and I'll delete everything else. So we're going to have one object, one item in our UI, and it's going to be a floating value, and it's going to be in meters. It's going to start at the value of 0. So we'll just get this going, and then I'll go in and I'll describe a few of these things and what they are. So that's looking good, that's looking good. They're all called the same name. And now we can come into the first object. And down here, we want to say, oh, first object. So this is registering the plugin object, and you can see the name here, description. So this is going to take in the name of the description resource file without the .res that's located within the res description folder. So that's what that's referring to, is that right there. And we'll call it oFirstObject. We use the capital O just because in the file itself it's referencing it as a capital O. And we also added an icon, and we left our icon in the res folder, and it's called firstObject.tiff. And we want to use that as well. So again, in here, you can see down here, it takes us in a base bitmap. And that's basically a texture. And what we could do is we could write code up here to create a bitmap, load in the image, and then assign it. But you can actually do it all in one step here for this particular purpose. And that's called auto bitmap. And then we just pass in the name of the file, and then that's it. I think we might have to put an _s there to make it a string, and this is effectively going to allocate a bitmap, load the file in, and then pass it into this method. So just a nice helper method there rather than creating a bitmap. And we'll do that in the other tutorials. I'll show you how to actually manually create bitmaps and manipulate them as well. So that's all we need to do there. I want to actually just, at the moment, just talk about one last parameter. This is the last one, disk level. If you are going to be changing this object and adding more parameters in future, so perhaps you put out the first version today and it has that one parameter that we created, and then in 6 months' time you put out an update to your plugin and it has multiple more parameters in it. When you do that, you can change this disk level, and that allows you to handle undo and backwards compatibility. Basically, enables you to detect what version of this plugin was used on a computer when your plugin loads in these objects in a scene file. So when people load in a C4D file and it has your objects in it, and they have your plugin installed, you'll be able to get the number that you pass in here. You'll be able to see what version of your plugin they used, and you can handle that however you need to. It might be a bit too much information for the moment, but that's why that's just set to 0, because this is the very first basically version of this plugin. And let's just leave that as that is right there. So we're loading in the string, we've got our description now, and we've also given it an icon. And let's just have a look at our folder here. We've cleaned that all up there. The description, we've cleaned that up there. So that's all we need. So let's just run that and see how we go. And just compiled it. Now I'm running it. And I've just realized one thing that we need to do. So this is not going to work right now. I might actually check to see and just highlight what the problem is, and then we will fix it as well. So you can see the button that we had is completely gone now. There's just no text in there at all. If I was to, it's actually there as a couple of dots. If I was to click on it, no, I don't think we can even click on it. So the problem here is that we didn't initialize the resource loading of our entire plugin. And so because of that, it wasn't able to actually load in these strings and do what it needed to do. And to do that, we need to come into main. And what I'm going to do here is just search for plugin message. Actually, I'll just go to the main.cpp file of the resource of this Cinema 4D SDK, because this will have it in there. Scroll down to plugin message, and there's this initialization here, and there's also a few other quite useful things as well. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to copy this entire function. I'm not going to explain everything at the moment, but I will now bring it into our plugin, our main file, and I'm going to replace the one that's there. And I'm just going to leave that in there. I mean, you can look over some of the stuff. This is command line arguments. This is a highly specialized thing. I won't worry about that. Menus and priorities. I'll just leave that there for now, at least. We won't be using scene hooks because Cinema for not scene hook, serial hook. We won't be using serial hooks because that was removed for R21. You no longer have that kind of system. Instead, you log in using their nice new interface to log into Cinema 4D on startup. So that's going to be gone. We're not going to register that. And I won't go into command line arguments today, and I won't go into that there either. So I might actually, let's just leave it there. It's not going to hurt anyone. It's all commented out. But the thing that we're interested in right now is this here. We just need to make sure that we have that. And it's got a comment here, don't start plugin without resource. So if it can't find the resource files, then it's not going to even start our plugin. And if we right click on this, this is a global variable. This class allows access resource files on the hard drive. For example, loading dollar resources to access strings or tables. So there's one of these for your plugin, and this initializes it, and that will load all the information from this res folder. So now that we've done that, we can build it again. And I'm just ignoring these errors at the moment, or these warnings. And so we come in and it's trying to initialize it. I will just press F10 to step, and it's found it. So it's returning true. So everything's good. It's initialized our resources. Now our plugin's loading. And now you can see my first object. So it's found that string and it's put it in there. Now we also added an icon. So if I right click on this and go show, right click, show icons, it's also got the icon. So now you've got the icon as well as the text. And if you want, you can remove the text and dock it and make it look like one of these. And when I click on this now, it's going to add it with the icon as well. So we've got my first object up there. And now you can see down the bottom here, there's now an object tab on our object. We've got our custom size parameter, and you've also got that orientation X, Y, and Z. So that's a kind of a default one that you can inherit and use if you need to. So at the moment, we're not doing anything with this. So let's actually try and use this custom size at least. And I'm going to remove the orientation because it's not really required for what we're doing. But I just wanted to show it there because it's useful. So let's come back into our res folder, our res file, ofirstobject.res. And I'm going to remove that include oprimitive access. So that won't show up next time. And now we've got our first object size. And it's just a floating value as a real, so it's just like an editable box. You can add lots of different things in here, like sliders and color pickers and all the things that you've seen in Cinema 4D. But let's just take this one here, and I'm just copying its name. And I'm going to go into the first object.cpp, and I'm going to add one more method in here. Let's go to the header file actually. And we'll right click and go to object data, and we want this init. This is the method we want. It's the initialization of our object. So I'm just going to paste that in here, and then I'm going to go to the CPP file, paste it in here, and finish that off. And now what we want to do in here is we want to initialize the data for that value, this one here. Okay. Now, this object, when it gets initialized or when it gets added to Cinema 4D, it's actually internally in Cinema 4D. It's included as what's called a base object, and the base object inside of it contains the actual node data, or this data here, which is object data. So the base object contains object data, and the way to set that is to you need to get access to the base object, and then the base object allows you to set the data either on this first object or on the resource data as well. And a base object, you'll see where I'm getting to in a second, is derived from a base list 2D, which is derived from a GE list node. And it's that GE list node that's passed into this initialization method. So what we do here is we want to do what we call casting. We want to cast this to the base object so we can set some data for our initialization. And so I'm going to go and copy base object, and I'm going to paste that in, say p_obj equals, and in brackets I'm writing base object with the star, and I'm going to type node. You can also do this another way, but I'm just going to stick with this for now. This is the classic way of doing it, I guess. And from this base object, we want to get a base container from p_object. And the way to get that from p_object is called get data instance. And it's going to get the instance of the base container stored within the base object. And again, the base object is what's actually going to hold our first object. And if we actually, I just want to show you how you would get access to this first object, but we're not doing that right now. But if you wanted to get essentially the first object from this, if you want to get ourself from this, then you would do that by going p_obj get node data, and then you'd pass in first object. And what that's going to do is that's actually then going to return essentially the first object, which is inside of the base object. Now, you can rewind and listen to that if you want, but for now, we're not doing that. We don't need that, but this becomes useful in many circumstances. I just wanted to highlight that the first object is actually contained within the base object, and the base object is this actual GE list node here. But for now, let's just delete that line because we don't need it. Now this base container is going to contain all the information for our first object. And the only information that it really actually has right now is what we just added to our resource file. Now it's going to have everything that's in obase, but it's also going to have our parameter here. And we can now set that. So I'm going to copy that. Go back to our file. I'm going to say BC, which is just our base container, and the pointer, set float. Now a real value, which is what this is here, this is real, is actually a floating value. Previously, in earlier versions of Cinema 4D, this method was actually called setReal, but now it's called setFloat. And what we're going to pass in is the ID, which is first object size, and we're going to give it a value. I'm just going to give a value of 100 and 0.0 f, just to say that it's actually a floating value. And we need to include this as well. So that is included in hash include o first object. So if we look at that, that has that defined in enumeration there. So now what we've done is we've initialized our first object and set that value to 100. And then down here, we can just return true because we've initialized successfully. If something went wrong during initialization, you can return false, and then your object won't get created. Now, what I want to do is I actually want to use this value in here and replace this with this size value. So what I'm going to do is just copy these two lines. I'm going to come down into here. I might actually do this at the top because it's nice to kind of get the information you need closer to the top just to keep it all grouped. And I actually want I don't want the polyobj, so I'm going to go way up here. I want the information in this OP. And this is essentially the one that owns this. Again, similar to above. And what we want to do here is we want to, again, get the data instance. And we want to get the floating value. So float, let's call it S. Well, let's call it scale. And I want to change that to get float. And we'll just leave that like that. And that's going to get the floating value out of our base container and store it in scale. Now the floating value also takes a default value if you need to, which is set to 0. But I'm just going to leave that right now. And if the user changes the data in the UI, so if they change this value, this first object size value that we saw when we loaded it previously, then this data's going to be dirty. And that's what this flag is. It's going to ask this, is dirty, and it's passing in these flags. So it's going to say, is your data dirty? And if it's true, then it's going to skip over that and come into this code right here. So every time we change that value, it's going to rerun this code. So now we have a scale value, and this should be by default set to 100. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to replace this one here. So now when we adjust that scale value, our cube should get bigger and smaller in the viewport. So I think that's enough there to get us going. And let's just build that and run it. And I'm just going to fix these warnings here. And it's complaining because I think wrong indentation of case, because of where it got copied from. I'm just going to delete these because we're not using them. And on this one, I'm going to open, leave that closed, break, and I'll tab that in as well, and build that. Now it's just cleaned up those warnings for me. So now I'm going to run the plugin. And I'm going to close these down so that we just see the attribute manager. And I'm going to save this as my startup layout again. Custom save as startup layout. Because I don't need to see that other stuff yet, but we still have it in our other layout there if we need to get back to it. And now I'm going to click on my first object. Actually, I want to bring back that icon as well, so I'm going to show icon, and I'm going to save my layout again because I want to have that icon nicely in the interface there. So now I can click on this, and it's create an object, and you'll see down here now that the primitive axis is gone because we removed that. Our custom size here is set to a value of 100, which is what we wanted it to be. And now if I was to change this, you'll see now that our cube changes in size. And you can also animate that. So if I was to click on this and then click up here and change that to 200 and then play our scene, you'll see that that is now animating. Now, if you didn't want people to actually animate any of your parameters, what you can do is you can actually come to your res file, and I believe it's just anim off. If you add that, let's just try that. Then that will turn the animation off. So that little the animation icon there will not be present. And let's just add another object. Oh, and I've got an error. So this is actually good to see. If this pops up, then you've written something incorrectly in your res file. And it gives you the line, the file, and the line number, line 8. Sometimes you might be able to continue this. Other times it might not let you. And so right now I'm just going to have to stop C4D. I'm just going to see if I can find that, what that flag should be, just to turn the animation off. Developers.maxon.net. And now I can come into plugin development. And we go to plugin resources, description manual. And there's actually something else I wanted to show here, which actually might not be on this, but let's just go up here. Description settings manual. No, I'm not able to find what I was looking for. So we'll just ignore that for now, and I may come back to that later. Okay, so I think that's a good enough place to stop for today. So let me just run that again. And what you did is you added resource files. You made Cinema 4D able to load in those resource files. In the resource files, you have text for your object. You gave it an icon. You also gave it an extra setting, and it has its own object tab. You're now using that setting to be able to adjust your object and also animate it if you need to. All right, thanks.